welcome back. Subject that continues to be in the news and in our culture is the agenda and the movement of the LGBTQ movement, very much all over the place and in the schools and everything else, and now in Europe. Delighted to have back with us George Carneal. He's the speaker, author of a fascinating book called From Queer to Christ, His Journey into the Light. He does have a website, George Carneal, that's CARNEAL.com. There's a picture of the landing page, his page, and then, of course, check out his book. George, good to see you again, friend. How are you?
I'm well. It's good to be back, Perry.
Good.
Thanks for having me.
Good. How's the Lord using you these days? You seem to be busy.
Yeah, it's a lot of interviews. I guess the LGBT movement is really something that people can no longer avoid anymore, and a lot of media outlets are really interested in discussing this topic.
Yeah, it's in our face whether we like it or not. It's difficult to deal with, but it's very much a part of our culture. It's in our face. By the way, before I get into Europe, were you surprised that, and let me back up a little bit, when the Supreme Court coming out of the session, such amazing decisions came. The big one, obviously, was the Dobbs case, which overturned Roe versus Wade. But as that decision was being released, Justice Clarence Thomas made the comment that the same thinking that allowed for them to overturn Roe versus Wade, in other words, the court got into the legislative business instead of legal interpretation business, applies to when the Supreme Court legalized same-sex marriages, and therefore it needs to be looked at as being unconstitutional. It's not a constitutional right that the court had granted. Well, that obviously sparked a firestorm over in the House, and they wanted to codify same-sex marriages by putting forth the bill, and 47 Republicans voted for it. It sits in the Senate, doesn't seem to go anywhere. Were you surprised by that?
I was surprised that Justice Clarence Thomas mentioned it, and I was hopeful that it would be overturned, but I'm disgusted with the Republicans, those who voted for it. It's hard to tell who the rhinos are now, and they need to be exposed, and we need to get them out of office.
Okay, so what's going on in Europe? We have our problems here. Is it a wildfire in Europe?
I think Europe is much worse. As I've said many times, if people in America knew the laws that have already been enacted in other various parts of the world regarding the LGBT agenda, the parents' rights are really being stripped away from them, and people are being threatened with arrest or having their children removed from the home if they don't support the transgender movement, if their child wants to transition, or if they dare to even post on social media anything negative about the LGBT or Islamic community. I know that there is a feminist lesbian in Sweden right now who posted that trans women are not really women, something to that effect, and she's looking at a 3-year prison sentence for merely posting something like that. And I know recently over in the UK, a British veteran was just arrested for merely reposting a meme that was supposedly anti-LGBT, but someone was offended. So instead of the police going after all of the crime in the UK, it was important to help the people who are offended in Britain. It's really insane what's happening, and if only people knew what the real agenda is behind the agenda and what's coming down the pike for America if we don't wake up. It's going to be shocking if people don't
well, I'm
wish to
saying this
discuss
because
this.
I sit on an international committee with some fellow Christian broadcasters, and we talk about these issues. And as much as it's uncomfortable to deal with, I mean, I'd rather talk about ice cream, you know. But here comes this stuff, and they're faced with it as well. They're scrappling as to whether or not they should be covering it on their programs like we are here right now. But the point being is, with this movement comes penalty. There becomes some punitive damages here based upon somebody's feelings. Yeah. And that's being instituted into law. And we're going, what in the world is going on? And it seems that the lawmakers are receiving the most pressures to pass this kind of, I guess, legislation, even though the majority of the citizens don't want it. So I guess asking you to comment on that, but the other thing that you're bringing to the table here is there's two agendas. There's this one, and then what is the real one? So first of all, am I wrong in interpreting that they are trying to give damage if you just hurt somebody's feelings about it?
We have just a world of crybabies. The only thing I can say is people have got to stop worrying about being called names. If I was worried about that, I wouldn't even be doing these interviews anymore. I've been called everything but a human being. But Perry, until we as Christians just decide, you know what, we answer to God, I'm going to do what he commands me to do, to share the truth in love. That is key, and sharing the gospel as well, and giving hope to anyone who's in bondage. This is not a message of hate. It is a very hateful thing to support the LGBT agenda and affirm that lifestyle, because it really is pushing people into rebellion against God. But it is the most loving thing to do, to tell them the truth. And lawmakers and Christians, we've got to start getting to the polls and start voting all of these woke Christians, all of these rhino Republicans, and all liberals, Democrats out of office. And we need to flood the government with real God-fearing Christians. That's the only way I can see this train wreck turning around.
Okay. The other thing that's very, very concerning, George, is, by the way, let me stop here because before I get down into some deeper topics here, quickly tell people your story. I think that helps us to understand where you're coming from.
I'm a son of a Baptist minister, and God brought me out of the homosexual lifestyle after 25 years. I know the mindset of the LGBT community. I wrote the book From Queer to Christ merely just to give Christians and especially parents insight into the reality of that world, so they could not only know how to witness to the LGBT individual. I even put the talking points that they use and debunk them with scripture. And I especially want parents who have LGBT kids to not be discouraged. If God can get me out of that life, and I'm seeing the work that he is doing in the LGBT community, we have the power, and God is on the throne. Prayer works. And I just want LGBT individuals to hear a different narrative than what the media is pushing, and to know that there is hope in walking out of that life. And it doesn't necessarily mean you have to be heterosexual, but really having a relationship with the Lord and walking with God and letting him use you. He will fill your life in so many other ways as he's done mine. So that's pretty much my background. So I just kind of give people a journey of how God brought me out of that life.
Part of that is you hit a wall. You had enough, right? Tell us about that.
One of the things that they will constantly push is that, oh, if this feels good, this must be who you are. And what the young LGBT individuals don't understand is that it will feel good in the beginning. But for me, after 3 years of having all the sex, the drugs, the partying, the clubbing, alcohol, and all of that stuff, I was no longer satisfied. It was like, okay, well, is this it? Is this the joy that you're supposed to find at the end of the gay rainbow? And it wasn't there. Sadly, it would take me 22 more years before I would eventually get out of that life. But I ended up turning to prostitution and being depressed and suicidal and attempted suicide. And all the gay men will come at me and say, well, that's just your story. But what I'm saying, it is the norm. It is not the exception. And I can back that up with the numerous LGBT individuals who contact me from all around the world who tell me how miserable they are and they want out of that life. You will never find peace in doing something that God's word deems an abomination and wicked, but he loves the individual. And that's the key. We need to let them know that God loves you. God is love, but he's also a God of wrath and judgment. And again, Christians have got to start getting some backbone, because we must fight for these young children whose minds are being destroyed by this LGBT agenda.
One other question before we switch topics here, and that is, how can I say this so it comes out right? You had enough, 22 years. How do we talk to somebody when they automatically know that you're a Christian and your belief system rejects their lifestyle? How do we find that way to have a relationship with them that sets that pre-bias aside?
Some Christians have the attitude that just by merely talking to them or being nice to people, that you're affirming their sin. You know, Jesus, thank God, hung out with all of the outcasts in spite of whatever their sin was. He never once gave the indication that he was affirming their sin. but was trying to bring them to a knowledge of understanding the sin and repentance. And thank God Jesus was so gracious in being patient with the broken, the outcast, the demonized, the sick. So I would say to Christians, just like with my own gay friends, those who still do talk to me, I talk to them on occasion. I ask them how they are. I can actually be civil to them. You know, Christians, it's not that hard. Be civil to people. Show them you love them and mean it and invest in their lives. It doesn't mean I go to the gay bars. I don't participate in gay activities. I don't participate in anything regarding that lifestyle. But when I talk to them, I do share with them the love of Christ and what Jesus did for me in my life. And I let them know that there's nothing I'm telling them that I didn't have to come to terms with myself. And the goal is to plant the seed. It is not our job to change that person. That's God's job, and the power of the Holy Spirit will work in those individuals. But you must plant that seed and speak the truth. And if they never talk to you again, that is not your problem. Your job is to do what God tells us to do, and that's to share the gospel in love. And when you do show them passages of scripture where it shows that God is condemning it, that it is an abomination, there's not one instance in scripture where the act is spoken of in a positive light. But don't leave them hanging. Show them also scripture where there's hope, that God has invested them. He loves them. He knows the number of hairs on their head. He formed them in the womb. And share with them the gospel and the love of Christ and what he can do to transform and redeem their lives and give them hope. If Christians would do that and walk with these individuals as they are walking out of that life and into the church where they will need a support system, there's nothing wrong with just being decent and kind and trusting that the pastor will have the guts to speak the truth of God's word and let the Holy Spirit work in that individual's life as he did mine.
That's passionate. Very good, George. Let me take a quick break. georgecarneal.com, that's his website. Check out his book, From Queer to Christ, My Journey into the Light. There's a picture of the cover of the book there, a Baptist preacher's son and his lifestyle and where he is now, what he's doing. When we come back, George, I want you to tackle this question. Why is public school replacing all education with some form of sex education? We'll be right back. All right, welcome back, and delighted to have back with us George Carneal, the speaker and the author. He's a speaker and author of a fascinating book, From Queer to Christ, My Journey into the Light. His website is George Carneal. That's CARNEAL.com is his website. And, of course, you can get the book online as well. He's tracking all kinds of things, especially the growth of the LGBTQ movement in Europe. George, I asked a question when we go into the break there. If it wasn't for the parents standing up in Virginia at the school board meeting last year, this thing would be full throttle. But that awakening where the parents confronted the school board started a movement across the country that really has awakened a lot of parents and people. But the question remains, what is it that's gotten into public education that the #1 topic that has to be taught is some form of sexuality? From transgender to LGBTQ, that somehow it replaces math, history, science. I mean, it goes on. This is the #1 topic that has to be introduced in education and fortified as part of the curriculum and clear down into kindergarten. What's this all about?
First of all, just shoving the perversion down the kids' throats. But Perry, as you understand, the agenda behind this agenda is if they can get these, if they can warp the minds of these kids at a small age, imagine in 10 to 20 more years what this country is going to be like. You can see how we've already pretty much pushed God out of the churches. We have lesbians and gays and drag queens standing in the pulpit. They're doing drag shows in churches, teaching kids in elementary school about anal and oral sex, homosexuality, transgenderism, masturbation. It really is trying an agenda to destroy the minds of these children. So then when we older ones die out, I think it's really preparing the world for the New World Order, because we know these psychopaths who are running the world, their goal really is to enslave humanity, prepare us for the New World Order, and to eventually remove God from all aspects of society and life. It's really to shut Christians up, silence people who oppose this agenda, And it's really an insidious agenda. Uh, the parents have got to wake up. They've got to get their kids out of public school systems if they can. It's no longer about ABCs and 1, 2, 3s. It's really about destroying their minds and talking about sexuality.
Of all of the things that the human experiences, the biggest one is the sexual drive within the human person. And when that becomes active in a young age, and you can fuel it with all types of alternatives other than the natural or the God-given pattern for humanity, this transgender thing it's almost like an atomic bomb that's gone off. It's just, and I'm dealing with parents now who kids went out and tried it. They don't know what they did, they're confused, and they're even contemplating suicide. The flip side of that is, never before have youth pastors been able to or had to deal with such issues. Normally, they took their kids to a barbecue and a car wash, all right, to have fun. Today, they're being asked, I have this attraction, I think I'm going to. These are questions that young people are asking their youth pastor. I mean, this is epidemic. So I don't know where this is going to go. The drag queen thing in schools and libraries, is there any way we can just say, no, no?
The only thing I can say is you've got to get your kids out of the public school system, or Christians need to flood the school boards and get on those to stop the agenda and the curriculum being introduced. But a lot of parents, sadly, are okay with this. And a lot of Christians are sitting in the church. They're apathetic. They're lukewarm. They could care less. Oh, well, God's going to take care of it. There's nothing we can do. They're just lazy, and they're not thinking about the kids. And I may sound cruel and harsh, but understand, unlike the heterosexuals who think that this is all cute, you're not looking at the aspect of those of us who came out of that life and our lives were destroyed, and the number of LGBT individuals who are committing suicide. And until these parents who have trans kids sit and, for instance, on YouTube, if you type in transition regret, you'll hear numerous, not even religious kids, talking about the change and what happened and how it didn't make them happy, and talking about the botched surgeries, the infections, how it didn't make them any happier. And they're now dealing with the aftermath of being guinea pigs, and they're trying to transition back. You have girls who have had their breasts removed, their internal organs removed, who now want to have kids and they can't. Boys who've had their penises removed. This is not like a tattoo. You may regret it, but you can cover it up. These are major decisions that is going to affect a person's life for the rest of their lives. And yet people just act like, oh, this is no big deal. You know, God made a mistake and we're going to correct it. We're basically insulting God and telling him, you didn't know what you were doing when you created this individual. It's such a slap in the face to God and to our common sense. You can't change your gender, and the kids are being used as guinea pigs. I fear 10 more years what this nation is going to be like, and the kids whose lives will be destroyed as a result of having believed that lie.
How did you deal with regret?
God has had to help me on that journey. I will tell you, Perry, the bitterness that I had that I bought the lie from Hollywood, the media, the LGBT activists, especially the liberal theologians. They twist scripture so much and they play with your head, and they get you to not believe conservative Christians, or that they're just closed-minded, narrow-minded, bigoted. And so when you go to God's word, you're confused, because if you don't really know God's word well, you really don't know, well, who's lying. So it was really a process of God continually having to put me in situations, especially a liberal church in Los Angeles, to where he just helped me to see this is a bunch of bull. And I finally walked out of that life. It was a combination of the misery and God just really working on me. And I'm so glad he was patient. I can't tell you the number of years I spent so depressed and suicidal and in tears all of the time, because I so badly wanted peace and peace of mind. And I sincerely went to God and begged him, if it's okay, give me peace. Put a good Christian man in my life so I can grow old with someone, because we all want to love and be loved. But if it's not okay, help me to know it, and I'm still going to follow you. And I was true to my word and to my commitment to God. He graciously gave me the truth. I walked out of that life, and here I am today, 14 years out of that life.
How do you control your anger?
I hope you'll see it as a righteous anger. What I mean by being angry about it is I know what I went through in that life and what I went through trying to get out of that life. And Perry, I can't tell you the number of people, friends of mine and people, acquaintances that I had, that I saw the devastating results of what happened to their own lives. I can't even begin to tell you what I've seen. So when I hear Christians or people in general just affirming these individuals, thinking, oh, I'm trying to do the right thing and be politically correct and loving, I know that when those kids go into that life, what awaits them. That's where my anger comes from, because my heart is broken for these individuals whom I know are not going to find peace in that life. But what people don't talk about are the sexually transmitted diseases, the threats that you are constantly under when you meet strangers online. You can be raped, drugged, robbed, murdered. I've seen it happen. I've had friends of mine that it's happened to. The drug, alcohol abuse, people who've lost everything because they got caught up in the party lifestyle. It's really a sad, destructive life. And the media and the people are not being told the truth about the reality of that life. And that's what I talk about in my book. I'm not X-rated, but I don't sugarcoat it.
Okay. One last question. I think it's an important one, George, and thank you for your transparency. What advice can you give a parent or parents whose child is now dealing with this or crossed over? I mean, here you are, a Baptist minister's son. I can't imagine what your parents were going through. Yeah. But if parents now are seeing, uh-oh, my child bought the lies, transitioning to the point where they don't want to be around me because they know I oppose it. What advice can you give a parent?
To never back down. And I had a former trans male friend tell me that her mother, who refused to use her male name that she preferred, she said it really kept her tethered to reality. Because understand, when you start to affirm this, they're already going through a delusional process as it is. And there's a mental illness that's going to creep in. And I would say to all Christians, pray for these individuals, because it's not right to make fun of them, even though we get angry at the agenda. But they really need to come to know Christ first, and find some good counseling, because the Holy Spirit will transform their lives. And I've seen it happen. So I know that we may get frustrated. We may not understand God's timetable, but don't be disappointed and be discouraged. Be hopeful, because God is doing a work and he's getting those kids out. And I hear from pastors and parents whose kids are in the life, and I hear the horror stories, but I just want to give them a word of encouragement to let them know it's nothing that God can't handle.
Okay, I got about a minute left. You said something here that's really fascinating. You said mental illness will creep in. You're the first person that I've interviewed that has said that, and it's been stuck in the back of my mind. I said, where does mental illness come into this? I know that spiritual illness comes into it, but mental illness. Can you just give me 30 seconds what you meant by that?
Yeah. At the root core of what is going on in that individual's life, they may have suffered some real shame, trauma, rejection, abuse, physical, verbal, mental, emotional, rape, incest, etc. That's why if you get them into counseling and they get to those root core issues, it's important that they change their thinking to have their mind match their body, not change your body to match your mind.
georgecarneal.com is his website. Check out his book, From Queer to Christ, My Journey into Light. And there's a picture of the cover of the book and a picture of his landing page, georgecarneal.com. George, thanks. Thanks again. Thanks for your openness, your honesty, your transparency. Keep up the good work, friend. God bless you.
Thank you.